Maybe your life didn't fall apart. Maybe it fell into place. At least that's what Carl Jung would say. Have you ever looked at your life and thought, I did everything right, so why does it feel so wrong? You wake up, 40 years old, maybe 42, and there's this quiet ache inside you. You've got the job, maybe a house, a relationship, everything the world said would make you whole. And yet, when you look in the mirror, you barely recognize the person staring back. You smile, but it's the kind of smile you give when you're tired of pretending. Carl Jung called this moment the turning of the soul. It's not failure. It's the moment life stops rewarding the mask and starts demanding the truth. Here's the strange thing. What looks like collapse is often the beginning of consciousness. The soul doesn't whisper politely when it's ignored. It shakes the foundation of your life. You start to feel it in small ways. You sit in traffic and wonder what all this effort is really for. You scroll through photos of your own life and feel detached, like watching a movie you're no longer in. You promise yourself, I should be grateful. But gratitude feels hollow. That's not weakness. That's the signal that your old identity is dying. Jung said, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. And that's where you are now, on the border between the world you built and the life that's calling. Here's the first truth. Rebirth doesn't come through success, it comes through honesty. Ask yourself, where have I been performing instead of living? Maybe it's at work, smiling through burnout. Maybe it's in love, keeping peace instead of being real. Maybe it's the version of yourself that everyone praises but you secretly resent. This discomfort you feel is sacred. It's the beginning of dialogue between who you are and who you pretended to be. So the first step isn't to fix your life. It's to stop lying to it. So the first step isn't to fix your life. It's to stop lying to it. Take one evening, turn off the noise, the phone, the TV, the expectations. Sit alone, even if it feels unbearable. And ask, when was the last time I felt alive just being me? You might remember a forgotten hobby, a small act of courage, a dream you shelved because adulthood said no. That memory is your compass. Life isn't punishing you. It's pulling you back toward yourself. When you resist that pull, everything feels like chaos. When you follow it, the chaos begins to make sense. Rebirth at 40 isn't about chasing youth. It's about recovering authenticity. It's the moment you stop measuring your worth by other people's applause. It's when you realize that your exhaustion isn't laziness. It's your soul saying, enough pretending. So here's your first practice. Stop fighting the collapse. Listen to it. Let the parts of your life that no longer fit fall away. Yes, it will hurt, but pain is how the false self cracks open. Look closely at what's breaking. Your career ambitions, your friendships, even your dreams. And ask, what truth is trying to be born through this loss? Because what's dying right now isn't you. It's the version of you that could never make you free. Jung believed that every breakdown is an invitation to dialogue with the unconscious. When you feel lost, it's not darkness consuming you, it's your inner world asking to be seen. So breathe. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't numb the silence. Let yourself stand in the ruins long enough to hear what's still alive inside you. That small voice you've ignored for years, that's your soul. And it's saying, I'm still here. Let's begin again. This is the first step of rebirth, not doing more, but daring to stop and feel. Because when you finally listen, you'll realize life was never asking you to be perfect. It was asking you to be real. It doesn't always happen with an explosion. Sometimes life falls apart quietly. You wake up one morning and the things that once felt certain, your job, your marriage, your faith in who you thought you were, begin to feel like they belong to someone else. You try to keep up appearances. You tell yourself it's just stress or burnout or age. But deep down, you know something else is happening. Something deeper. Carl Jung said the unconscious doesn't ask for permission. It breaks through when the ego becomes too rigid to change. That's what the midlife collapse is. Not punishment, but pressure. The soul demanding evolution. You see, the first half of life is about structure, building, achieving, creating safety. But the second half, it's about meaning. And meaning can't grow in a life built only on survival. So the collapse begins. Not to destroy you, but to show you where you've been asleep. Maybe you've been chasing recognition instead of fulfillment. Maybe you've been giving more than you have, or living by a script you never wrote. You did what you were told would make you happy. But happiness that's borrowed always fades. That's why it feels like your world is crumbling. Because the structure was never yours. It was your mask's. Jung called this confrontation the dark night of the soul. It's when the old identity starts to die so that a truer self can emerge. And yes, it feels like death. Because the ego experiences change as annihilation. But something sacred happens here. When everything external loses its meaning, you finally begin to hear your inner life. Think of the butterfly. It doesn't grow wings by adding to the caterpillar. It dissolves completely inside the cocoon. That's transformation. The old form must break so the essence can reshape itself. So if your life feels like it's disintegrating, breathe. This isn't the end. It's the middle. The breaking open before becoming whole. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Pain is not a sign that something's wrong. It's proof that something real is trying to be born. Here's the truth. When your life falls apart, your shadow rises. All the emotions you've buried, anger, shame, envy, grief, begin to surface. They're not here to destroy you. They're knocking, asking to be seen. This is where most people turn away. They numb it, distract it, rationalize it. But Jung taught that what you resist controls you, and what you face transforms you. So the second step of rebirth is this: let your shadow speak. Write down what you're feeling without editing. Admit what you envy, what you fear, what you've hidden. It's not weakness, it's integration. The moment you name what hurts, it loses power. You'll start to see patterns, how the same type of person, conflict, or disappointment has followed you for years. That's not coincidence. That's your unconscious calling you to heal. This is how the psyche works. It repeats what's unresolved until you understand the message. Every failed relationship, every burnout, every collapse, they're not curses, they're invitations. So instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is life trying to teach me right now?" That shift in perception, from victim to participant, from fear to curiosity, is where healing begins. You'll start to realize that every ending was a teacher in disguise. The friendship that faded taught you boundaries. The failure that broke you taught you humility. The emptiness that scared you taught you depth. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Your life has been guiding you back to yourself all along. And this, Jung said, is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole, the point where your light and your shadow stop fighting and finally begin to dance. So let the collapse happen. Let the structures fall. Let the truth surface. Because the life that's dying is the one that kept you small, and what's rising is the one that will finally set you free. At some point, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And you start asking, "What is this trying to awaken in me?" That's when the real transformation begins. Carl Jung believed that healing doesn't come from escaping pain. It comes from meeting it with awareness. The goal isn't to destroy your darkness, but to understand that your darkness is part of your wholeness. He called this process individuation, the journey of uniting the conscious and the unconscious self, light and shadow, reason and instinct, until they begin to work together, not against each other. You don't heal by climbing out of your shadow. You heal by walking into it with light. In midlife, the psyche pushes you toward this confrontation. Everything you've hidden, your anger, your shame, your fear, begins to demand attention. But here's the truth. Those feelings aren't signs of regression. They're signs of rebirth. When you were younger, you survived by dividing yourself. You learned to hide what wasn't accepted, to play roles that would earn love. But the soul is patient. It waits. And around 40 it comes knocking. Not to punish you, but to remind you there's more to you than performance. So what's the way forward? Start by practicing inner dialogue, not self-improvement, self-listening. Sit quietly and ask, what part of me have I abandoned to please others? You might hear a childlike voice saying, I just wanted to be seen. Or an angry one saying, I'm tired of pretending. Write those voices down. They're not weakness, they're wisdom. They are fragments of your authentic self that got buried under expectation. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is how you stop repeating the same patterns, not by fighting them, but by understanding them. Maybe your pattern is always giving more than you receive, or chasing relationships that feel like home, even when home was painful, or setting goals that impress everyone but leave you empty. These aren't accidents. They're your psyche replaying old stories until you learn the ending consciously. That's why awareness is more powerful than willpower. You can't outwork your shadow in Nidul, but you can outshine it with truth. The third step of rebirth is this. Turn curiosity into compassion. Instead of judging your pain, explore it. Ask, what are you trying to teach me? If your anger speaks, listen. It might say, you stopped protecting your boundaries. If your sadness speaks, it might say, you've been carrying too much for too long. If your fear speaks, it might say, you've built a life on control because you forgot how to trust. When you begin this dialogue, your emotions stop being enemies. They become guides. This is what Jung meant by holding the tension of the opposites. The goal isn't to choose light over dark, but to find balance. To let both parts of you exist without war. So if one part of you wants to leave everything behind and another part wants to stay safe, don't pick sides. Hold both. That's where growth happens. Rebirth doesn't come from certainty. It comes from sitting in the mystery long enough for clarity to emerge. This is the inner shift. You stop trying to control life and start allowing it to transform you. And little by little, your pain becomes peace. Your confusion becomes wisdom, and your emptiness becomes space for something new. That's the secret Jung discovered. That the way out of suffering is not through resistance, but through relationship with your soul. You stop fixing yourself and start befriending yourself. And that's when everything begins to change. Rebirth doesn't arrive like thunder. It begins quietly, in the softest moments of honesty. One morning you wake up and for the first time in years you don't feel the need to rush. You pour your coffee, you sit by the window, and you realize that peace doesn't need to be earned. It was waiting for you all along. That's what Carl Jung meant when he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You stop fixing yourself and start befriending yourself, and that's when everything begins to change. Rebirth doesn't arrive like thunder. It begins quietly, in the softest moments of honesty. One morning you wake up and for the first time in years you don't feel the need to rush. You pour your coffee, you sit by the window, and you realize that peace doesn't need to be earned. It was waiting for you all along. That's what Carl Jung meant when he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Rebirth isn't a return to youth. It's the birth of truth. You stop chasing approval, you stop performing, and you begin to live from the center of your being. You no longer measure success by the noise of others, but by the silence that feels like home. This is what happens when you integrate your shadow. You don't become perfect. You become whole. You realize that the parts you once feared, the anger, the envy, the doubt, weren't there to shame you. They were messengers of unmet truth. When you stop rejecting those parts, they stop sabotaging your life. They become energy, alive, creative, and grounded. Rebirth is not about escaping your past. It's about giving your past a new meaning. You stop fixing yourself and start befriending yourself. And that's when everything begins to change. Rebirth doesn't arrive like thunder. It begins quietly, in the softest moments of honesty. One morning you wake up and for the first time in years you don't feel the need to rush. You pour your coffee, you sit by the window, and you realize that peace doesn't need to be earned. It was waiting for you all along. That meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You stop fixing yourself and start befriending yourself, and that's when everything begins to change. Rebirth doesn't arrive like thunder. It begins quietly, in the softest moments of honesty. One morning you wake up and for the first time in years you don't feel the need to rush. You pour your coffee, you sit by the window, and you realize that peace doesn't need to be earned. It was waiting for you all along. That's what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Rebirth isn't a return to youth. It's the birth of truth. You stop chasing approval, you stop performing, and you begin to live from the center of your being. You no longer measure success by the noise of others, but by the silence that feels like home. This is what happens when you integrate your shadow. You don't become perfect. You become whole. You realize that the parts you once feared, the anger, the envy, the doubt, weren't there to shame you. They were messengers of unmet truth. When you stop rejecting those parts, they stop sabotaging your life. They become energy, alive, creative, and grounded. Rebirth is not about escaping your past. It's about